Is a skilled pilot more important than cutting edge drone technology? We're diving into the clash of man versus machine right here on the flight path. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Flight Path, Sonoran Desert Institute's podcast on the expansive world of uncrewed technology. I'm your host, Christian Sequerra. I'm joined today by James McDaniels and Don Heon. Say hi, guys.
Hey.
All
everyone.
Right. So today's podcast theme is drone pilots versus drone technology. I want to get into that. You know, in the shooting world, on the other side of SDI, we have what is better, a better shooter or a better gun. And so I want to equate that to the drone world. So let's talk about that. What do you guys got on that?
Don, I'm going to let you start off on this one.
Yeah, so I've been flying for a long time, like over a decade now. And I have the experience to fly a lot of different types of platforms, but it's not the experience that makes you a good pilot on the control sticks. I would say it's more so the knowledge of the requirements of knowing your system, your UAS system, knowing your airspace, knowing the rules and regulations. You know, just like a man pilot, they could fly an airplane all day long, but if they don't know how to taxi themselves along a runway or ask for clearance, they're not going to be a good pilot. So I think the majority of being a good pilot is skill set is secondary, knowledge is primary. So if you have that knowledge, you're going to be a good pilot.
Okay. So with that being said, AI knows it all. So does that mean the better technology wins in your scenario?
I like this. I like where this is going a lot. So
AI wins, huh? Well,
so
that's what I'm asking. What's better? Is it better to have AI flying a drone or Don Heon?
It's depending on an application, right? Drones are built for the 3Ds: dull, dirty, dangerous jobs, right? So when you think about, okay, something that's dull, dirty, and dangerous, maybe not exciting, it's a repeatable task, it's something that doesn't take a lot of maneuverability. For example, you're flying a drone and you're just flying in a grid, capturing photos of the ground. Well, that's something AI could really handle. I mean, as it is, that application is mostly autonomous. You plan the flight route, you press a button, the aircraft goes and does what it needs to do. But in situations like aerial cinematography, that takes a lot of that hands-on skill that Don was talking about. And then same thing with some inspection capable applications too, wind turbine inspections. In the past, we had a situation where the turbine couldn't be stopped. The brakes couldn't be put on it because its assembly wasn't completed yet, and we had to do a demonstration. We had 30 people out there. Well, guess who had to fly that thing while it was slowly pinwheeling and demonstrate the photo quality of what the drone could capture? So manual skills come in handy. Technology is getting to a point where it makes the pilot's lives a little bit easier in some applications. But I agree with Don in the point of knowledge only helps you improve. But I'll hold off there and let you guys get in here a little bit.
Yeah. A good pilot knows his system and knows it well. If you could hand the most experienced pilot a drone, and if they don't know the system, they're going to be like a newbie, right? Because they don't know the flight modes, the manual flight modes, any GPS assisted flight modes, or even how the UAS responds. So,
and to add to that, like for example, let's go back to that AI, right? So today there's models like DeepSeek that are small enough to run on companion computers, small enough to fit on a small drone. They're getting lighter weight. Some people have already started testing them to where they automatically generate a flight path to follow. And a lot of them will have integration with the national airspace. It'll tell you what other aircraft are around. It'll warn you. It'll have all these fail-safes built in to keep you from crashing the drone. But if you have, and those drones are like $30,000, sometimes a little less. But even if you have a drone like that and you're still just starting out and you really don't know how to use all those features, it puts a detriment on that aircraft. It becomes the pilot being a hindrance to that aircraft. So it comes back to that overall knowledge of not just what the features are, but also how to integrate them, how to use them. But there is something to be said about AI coming along, and when it comes to a lot of commercial applications, eventually being at the front of most of those flight operations and taking place. But there's the regulatory side of the FAA even allowing there to not be a pilot in the loop, because there always has to be a pilot in the loop to make the right judgment calls.
Yeah.
Where do you think that's going in the future, though?
And that all depends. That all depends on how fast rules and regulations are advanced. So, for example, Part 107 first came out, I want to say about 4 years later. There was hundreds of night waivers. To fly at night, you used to have to ask the FAA for permissions. And then recently, Don, was it 2020 or 2021? Do you remember?
When what?
When the waivers for night operation were incorporated into the total Part 107 rule set.
That was just a few years. I think that was 21, actually.
Okay, yeah, so 2021. Thanks. I just wanted to double check on that because they had enough waivers to where they were saying, okay, there's hundreds of operators that have these waivers, and we can say that when they're operating with the directions that the FAA has given them, they can fly it safely. So now that's part of a rule set. Now, there are other types of operation beyond visual line of sight. Multi-UAS operations still need a waiver, but the FAA is trying to gather more data so that they become a national standard as a rule set. So I think when those become national standard rule sets, and Don, you can cut me off on here if you like, I think that's kind of an unlocking stage to really get to that point where we're seeing more of that high level of autonomy and features really being taken advantage of. What would you say, Don?
I agree. I mean, the FAA needs data to incorporate these rules and regulations into, everyday operations. They can't be handling 10,000 waivers a year, so if they can write some rules and regulations and incorporate that into Part 107, then, all the easier on them, right? Speaking of Part 107, James, when did you get your Part 107 certificate?
So I first had to fly under the FAA 333 exemption.
Okay.
So I was first flying for that. So as soon as it came out in 2016, took my test, and then got it in, it was September of 2016. Sorry, 2016, guys. 2016. September 2016 is when I got it.
I think I got my FAA 107 license around that time. But I remember the test being really hard, a lot focused on airspace. 30%, 35% of the questions was airspace. And I'm just wondering, how beneficial is the FAA Part 107 test in today's standards? Like, do you feel that we should follow in line with what Canada's doing and do a practical examination? Like, anybody can go out to Best Buy and buy a drone. Doesn't mean they're a good pilot, right?
So that actually, I want to ask it from Christian's perspective. So to what Don just said, Christian, you don't have your 107 license yet, but as I understand it, you are working towards it. How would you feel? Would you feel much better with it just being a knowledge test like it is now, where you go in, take the knowledge test, and then you're allowed to go and fly commercially? Or would you feel a lot more comfortable or saying you have more skills to show if you also had to prove that you could practically fly this thing? What's your take on it, kind of being new to the industry?
I equate it to what I know. So I know guns. I'm learning more about drones, but I equate it to getting your conceal and carry license. And so you can take programs where, you sit online, go through the information, like consequences, basic maintenance, operation, all that kind of stuff. Or you can, some states actually require you to go shoot. So you have to prove you can shoot and, keep your groupings within, it's a pretty big group, and you can use a 22. But, you at least have to prove yourself as a shooter, so equating it to that, I would probably feel more confident if, you had to take the exam, you had to take the written, and it's almost like a driver's test too. So you gotta take the written exam and then do the practical examination as well. So you can prove that, hey, I should be doing this, or I can do this commercially.
Sounds like we're all on the same page, and I'm glad to hear that, even from kind of being new to the industry from that perspective as well. Like myself, being in the industry for some time, same with Don, we see the benefits of showing the practical application and your practical skill set for flying, because even in manned aviation, a part of getting your private pilot's license or your sports pilot license, there is an oral examination with your check airman. Then there is there's a written before that. So you still have to do the written examination. And then there is a practical where you're actually in the aircraft, flying with your check airman, going through all the maneuvers and skills and demonstrating the knowledge actively in the aircraft that you're supposed to know while flying. So I agree that we should have that. as part of Part 107. Granted, we'll leave it up to the regulators, of course, but there are other organizations out there, and I think this is going to be an interesting point of conversation for us, is that there are other organizations out there, like APSA, which is the Aviation Pilot Safety Association, and essentially they've created what's called the BPERP, Basic Remote Efficiency Pilot Evaluation, and it's meant to show that you actually have that practical skill set as a SUAS, or a small unmanned aircraft systems pilot operator. Don, have you heard of BPERP before and that kind of that?
That's the first time I heard it.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, essentially, it was created by NIST, National Institutes of Standards and Technology, and then APSA kind of adopted it and now actually has certifications for it as well. Luckily, I was able to go to training to become a proctor for the 3 different levels. They have it for basic, advanced, and confined. Confined is being able to fly indoors in small spaces. It's flying within close proximities to objects. And basic is just flying in an open space, but it's testing not just your skills to do basic maneuvers, but it's also testing your ability to work the onboard sensor to get a good image of something as well. It's used as like a certification in public safety for UAS operators now, and there's a lot of adoption going on there. But there, again, like to our points earlier, it is moving in a direction where there's some practical proof of skills as well.
Do you think that practical test is needed in today's UAS industry, or do you feel like it's definitely going to be needed in the next 3 to 4 years? Like, is it warranted right now, or as technology grows, are we going to be challenged even more in the next 3 to 4 years for commercial operations?
How would you feel about that, Christian? What's your take on this?
I mean, with me not knowing a lot about the drone industry, where it's going, I just know technology and automation. To me, when we're talking about drone pilot versus, drone technology, I just feel like with it, obviously somebody's going to need to program everything, but once it's programmed, and even with some of the AI out there now, if you just said, hey, I need this drone to do this, like, I don't know. If you wanted to make a living off of it, yes, definitely you need to have all the certifications, practical examinations, all that, in my opinion. But, it's like the robots are taking our jobs, do you see like the drone industry doing that kind of thing where you wouldn't need as many licenses, but, maybe regulate those licenses and all that stuff?
So drones, I like to explain it like this. Drones are not here to take jobs. They're here to make your job and what you do, no matter your application, safer, because we don't want to take professionals in those applications. For example, and this will lead into a little scenario-based discussion for us, the question as well. So you're a wind turbine inspector. Your job is to hang from ropes, spec blades, and check their conditions. Now, what if, again, you could learn to use the drone as a tool instead and do the inspection that way? We still need your knowledge and understanding of wind turbines, wind farms, the whole operation flow, how that goes, and what the clients, the O&Ms, are looking for. But now you have this additional tool in your tool set to be able to conduct your job in a way where you're not putting yourself at the same level of calculated risk. Now, to the point that you mentioned earlier about advancing AI and, technology versus pilot, we have to consider the possible situations. And here's one scenario for you. So, wind turbine farm, drone in a box, a docked system, like a DJI dock, if you will. And this thing is on an automated flight plan. Once every week, it takes off, goes, inspects the wind turbine, fully automated. Well, okay, it goes, and it goes on its 5th time, and the winds are too strong. And it doesn't know to combat that or how to land itself safely. It only knows to try to return home to where it took off of, but it can't because the winds are pushing it further away from home. Well, if AI or the autonomous system isn't smart enough to do that, and a pilot's not in the loop, what do you do? So even at a certain level of autonomy to where we can mostly be hands-off, if you will, there should still be an operator in the loop to be able to take manual control of something like that, who can make the decisions outside of what is programmed to be able to reduce the fallout of a potential crash or land somewhere else safely if the aircraft doesn't have the capability to get back to where it took off from. So So for that specific scenario, it's kind of an argument for both, right? I don't think we'll see a point where the pilot is truly ever out of the loop. I'll stop. Go ahead if you want to. Sorry,
Don,
I'm going in instructor mode, guys. Sorry.
I just wanted to add to that. You kind of stirred up some old previous memories in my head. And, I got my Part 107 certificate and I took a knowledge test, right? So let's say in 3 to 4 years or 5 years or, an extra year that you have to take a practical test, right? Where you demonstrate your flight skills and you get certified to work in commercial operations, whatever that is. Well, who is certifying you and how is that person getting certified to teach you? Like, are we going to be stepping into the CFI realm, like on manned airplanes, where to become a CFI instructor, you have to follow certain standards and get certified as an instructor? Are we going to experience that in the drone world? Right?
But that's a very strong point, because why recreate the wheel? Right?
Yeah.
Like for example, as you mentioned, there's CFI, which is a certified flight instructor, and then there's in manned aviation, there's like twin engine ratings, there's commercial ratings, there's instrument flight ratings, which means you can fly just by looking at your control systems panel in the cockpit and not looking outside. There's all these different ratings. So I can see that becoming true with uncrewed aircraft systems as we get more national standard rule sets that are a little more complicated than just being able to fly at night, if you will, like BVLOS, like flying multiple drones with one operator, which has been done, and it is still going on for tests. Back in 2019, I was with a company, Flirty, got a combined waiver for flying beyond visual line of sight, 10 aircraft with one operator. So that's where we go back to that level of automation where we're like, the operator is still in the loop, but we're acting more like air traffic controllers, telling the aircraft when to take off, telling it when to deliver when it gets there. It's back, okay, it's landed. You're communicating with the person on site, tell them, okay, swap batteries, load the next package, so on and so forth. Where it's becoming where that manual control isn't there, but we're still monitoring, we're still orchestrating the flight operation, if you will. But I can see, but that was very complicated. For us to do that, we actually had to have our own training program that was approved for training us to be able to fly under those operations per the waiver, per the FAA granted waiver. So even at that, there was additional training needed in order for us to operate safely under that. So I can see there being a very strong argument for such things as Part 108. Christian, have you heard of Part 108 before?
Just a little bit. And that includes like beyond visual line of sight. Is that what that's about? Okay.
Correct.
Tell us about that a little bit for us normal folk.
So Don, before I begin, you've done some research on Part 108, right?
I know that Part 108 is not like a thing yet. It's more of a blanket term that people are using.
It's a talking point, yeah.
Right, it's a talking point. But I do know a little bit about that.
Yeah. So essentially, Part 108 would be like an additional rule set that you would have for flying beyond visual line of sight, because it can become very quickly complicated depending on the application that's being flown. So with that, there is the potential of it being an additional rating to your Part 107 or an additional license that you would get. So there's been hints of discussion around that. Luckily, from being in the integrated pilot program back around 2018, 2019, which turned into the FAA Beyond program, we got to talk and be involved with, we had a FAA group of individuals assigned to us who would say, like, listen, we can see it going this way. We can't say for certain, but it would be good to have that additional qualification, because if we find out this is far more complicated than your normal 107 operations and additional training and certification is needed, then it could go in that direction. So that advanced notice of proposed rulemaking is out there for, Part 108, but no updates have been out there since, I think it was 2022 when they came out with that advanced notice of proposed rulemaking. So it'll be interesting to see, for sure.
So it'd be almost like having your, regular driver's license as opposed to like your CDL or something like that. Maybe have an additional.
Exactly. Yep. Or like, say you have your driver's license, then you got your motorcycle endorsement on there too.
You've got a different level and class of skill set. So
do you think those endorsements will be VTOL, fixed wing, multi-rotor, single rotor helicopters? Like, do you think it's going to...
a lot of letters on a pilot's license.
Yeah.
It's like, this is it right here. So,
well, I mean, our driver's license has a ton of letters for the driver's license, for the ID license number. So, I mean, it take up some space for sure. That's another good question. That brings up another point, because flying drones, everybody thinks a quadcopter. They think something that can fly vertical, has a lot of motors on it, but sometimes not everybody thinks of, okay, think of like a smaller plane instead, or think of like something of mix between the two that can take off vertically and then fly like a fixed wing. That's your VTOL.
Well,
So
let me ask you this. So I know we've been talking a lot about certifications, training, experience. On that other side, with a variety of different drones, what technology is out there that makes your actual skill, experience, and certifications kind of like somewhat null and void? Like if you know basic drone flight skills and rules, and even with technology, you probably don't even need to know the rules that much if stuff is set within the parameters through the technology. What's out there to help the crappy drone pilot like myself?
Well, DJI had their airspace, right? They had their airspace in their drones, but then they just got rid of it. So I don't know why they got rid of it. I don't have a definitive answer, but for a while there they were trying to. Huh?
yes, what's your
What's your
speculation,
speculation
Don?
of why they would?
Honestly, I think they catered to the consumers. Like they were realizing that they had so much difficulty, and the consumers were complaining that they had to ask DJI to unlock their drone, and then they had to go to a separate place to unlock their drone. So I think they just got rid of it. Like they collected their data, they realized it wasn't probably the thing that the US market needed, and they released it for free. So now there's no locking of your airspace inside the DJI drones.
James, can you explain that a little bit, how that works?
If I understand that a little bit more, I think so. What I saw on some release, Don is correct, and I agree with his standpoint as well. What's essentially DJI had is it's a geofence tool, where if there was controlled airspace, like if you were flying close to an airport like Newark or Phoenix, for example, if you were too close to it within a certain distance, DJI would not allow you to take off at all. Because if you look online for what's called UAS, the FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, UAS facility maps, they show different levels of what is the max altitude above ground you're allowed to take off to close to an airport. So if you were in a place where it said 0 on that map, guess what? You can't arm. You're not taking off. We're not even going to allow you the chance to do so. That's essentially what the DJI app was telling you. But now that's no longer in place. Now it's just a matter of them saying, hey, you're in controlled airspace. Make sure you're aware that you're taking off at your own risk if you're here, and not completely preventing you. So essentially it's just a warning mitigative box, and that you have to confirm that you understand it, that you're taking responsibility as a pilot and understanding the situation before you're allowed to take off and fly, without that predetermined restriction that completely doesn't even let you arm the aircraft.
Yeah, I had to do a lot of survey work, mapping, videography, a lot of that in airspace, right? And that was part of my job. And so I had to not only ask DJI to unlock my drone, but then go, call the tower if I had my airspace waiver or whatever the case may be. And it was really cumbersome. And I think now that DJI has released a warning to the end user that they have to agree to this, then that takes the liability off them, and they don't have to worry about the FlySafe database anymore.
Well, and you shared with me a video, and you said this happened a few years back, of somebody just taking their drone out and flying it into airspace. And so that probably wasn't a DJI geofence.
I sent you the link, but essentially what this guy was doing is he was taking one of his FPV drones. And I don't know exactly where this was, but it was on the approach path to an airport. And this was like 7 years ago. And it was a big deal with the industry and the FAA. And what he did is he armed his FPV drone and he climbed up above where the airplane was coming in from the approach. And he dove the airplane and followed it into the approach path.
All right. Let's see. I got the screen share up. Let's watch it. Let's see.
James, you remember this?
Yeah. No, this caused a big uproar in the industry.
Yep. And then he finds the airplane and then just dives right in.
Dude, that is crazy.
Like, oh my gosh, are you serious?
Why? Just no, you don't do that kind of thing.
You don't do that,
No.
And I think his channel name was called the 1%er, if my memory serves me from back in the day. But it's things like that.
Oh, genius. He's a genius then.
It's people like that ruin the industry for us,
It can cause a lot of issues. I mean, I think some of that is what can kind of, I mean, I'm sure before it as well, but that kind of very concern is what brings on those restrictions that we've seen for so long. But that doesn't mean just because those restrictions are not in place anymore that we shouldn't be making smart calls and safe decisions and knowing where we're actually allowed to fly and where we aren't, using apps out there like the video that you and Don put out not too long ago on the Sonoran Desert Institute channel is a great video. What you're doing as a new pilot out in the field and going through your Lance approvals. That's a wonderful video that kind of shows, is where I'm flying, safe to actually fly? And if it's not, or if I'm in controlled airspace or just under controlled airspace, how high can I allow myself to fly, right?
And if you haven't seen that video, we'll put the link right up here somewhere. So
nice. Yeah, it's a good video. You should watch it. But with that goes along with what we were saying earlier. It rolls back to your question about like, as things get smarter, how much knowledge does the pilot still have to maintain? Well, it's not just if they get smarter, it's also how much like brand makers like DJI will make decisions that change, how things operate, or how regulations will change as well. So if we try to kind of preset regulatory guidance into, or some, not all, some regulatory guidance into it, there's some argument for saying, okay, the drone's not going to allow you to fly above 400 feet. It's something preset in there. And if you're ever in a country where you are allowed to, which I have been in the past, allowed to flown up to, I think, 1,200 feet above ground level for transition for drone delivery flights, we had permission from the Civil Aviation Organization there to do so. But if those locks are in place, the pilot still has to understand how to go in and unlock those with permissions granted. So that argument for knowledge never really, I would say, gets nullified in some way, because we don't, how fast this industry changes. It's to set a drone out with specific levels of autonomy that is set to a specific standard, the way and the time and place, it's going to change in some way, shape, or form.
So you and I have been to a lot of trade shows together, conventions, and seen some really cool stuff, and you guys are in this industry. Talk to me more about some of the cool automation technologies that are out there that a normal person would not know of.
James, let me hit on
Christian.
one thing.
Hey, Christian.
Let me hit on one thing just for a second. So LiDAR is a big thing, not just for surveying and mapping, but also for obstacle avoidance. So like the Air 3S has been on my radar for a little while, no pun intended, but I've wanted to get that drone because of the LiDAR sensor that it had on top of it, in which case, like, let's say you lose link behind a building or several buildings or trees, it will not only return to home, but it will find the best path to get back to home. And it'll go underneath a parking garage and land in front of a car, And so I think LiDAR is going to be a big one for obstacle sensing.
I think for my side, one of the cool things I've seen is the implementations made to make it easier for the user to control the drone. And I don't mean the operator themselves, but the people who might be interacting with it. Back in 2018, another drone delivery company, it was a VTOL hybrid, took off vertically, fixed wing flight, long distance delivery flights, 5 pounds of payload. And we were able to work with one of the PX4 firmware devs on contract, and they actually implemented the ability for us to implement a flight route that would go to the location, land, and when the individual was ready to send it back home, we didn't have to press anything as the operator. The individual at the receiving site would look around, okay, takeoff area clear. They would press a button, and then they would have 30 seconds, and this thing would beep loudly, get faster, and they would back away, keep the takeoff and landing area clear. It would take off and come back without us having to reconnect to the aircraft or reload a mission. Because the reason why that was important to have is because we even had satellite communications on that aircraft, but the satellite communications at the time was only like a couple hundred kilobytes, nothing big. You could barely send enough packets to command a takeoff and upload a mission that way, where it would take forever to do so. So this was a way to let the end user look around, make sure it's safe, confirm that it's good to come back home. It'll take off, and once it got airborne, it had better communications. We could see the status updates, the battery levels, and everything, and at least send a return to home command if something didn't seem right, and have the aircraft return to where it took off from for the original proportion of the delivery without us having to replan a flight route, re-upload a flight route, or anything like that. It was a persistent flight plan. So that's one of the things. It's small, but it's cool to see.
How knowledgeable would you need to have been to operate something like that? Because that's not for the average user.
No, certainly
Right?
not. Yeah, as an operator, you need to consider all the possibilities, and that's where the whole risk management mindset comes into play, as well as knowing, how to structure a concept of operation, how the flight operation flow comes into place. And to do that, we had to have the knowledge of, does the person receiving this thing and touching the button need to have any additional training? What training do they need? Are the distances that we're flying, and also the distances that we're flying with headwinds or different wind conditions, allow us to always make it to the location with enough fuel to get back. And those wind conditions would vary from idle winds, which is 0, nothing, all the way up to the max possible conditions, which is like 20 knots of headwind, right? So we had to think as an operator and do those calculations and run those flight tests while the aircraft were being developed and say, how far can we actually fly in the max wind conditions with a headwind, so that we're always going to be able to make it back in those conditions.
So let me ask you this, with the talk of like, can I afford this to do that and all that? Is there a cost performance balance for somebody who's just getting into drones? Obviously, people have, different range of pockets than others, but what would you guys suggest that the person knows, but also needs as far as technology when they're getting started?
Well, they have to determine whether they're going to be a beginner, a consumer, a prosumer, or an expert on the enterprise level. And there's varying ranges of that, right? So you kind of have to determine your objective on what you want to do and find the drone that's going to be the right tool for you. There's many smaller drones that'll get you into the industry and get you some experience. But then eventually, if you like that area and you want to expand a little bit, then maybe you need a prosumer drone with a little bit more technology packed into it. So there's varying levels of price points for that.
Okay, so imagine me. Like, I just want to get into drones. I want to know how to fly them. I want to be able to do some cool whirly twirlies, to show off, and then maybe take some cool photos when I'm out at events or something like that. Is there a low end that I would need to focus on? Or is there something, can I spend money to not have to worry about my poor level of skill?
So yeah, and I would say that price range is around $400 to $200 in that price range.
Do you have drones in mind that you're thinking about for me to do this?
So in that price range is actually, the drone that we send out for UAS 250, right? And it has this one, I 3D printed some prop guards and put on it, so that's why those are there.
That doesn't look like anything I've seen.
Yeah, no, I do some 3D printing as well. It's a cool thing to get into in the UAV space. You can print your own frames and whatnot. Makes it a little cheaper when you're doing builds. Don't have to buy airframe components, but that one is around like $250, $300. It's got some semi-autonomous flight capabilities to it. Like, you can tell it to do circles around a point and it'll fly circles and do orbits for you. It has, tracking of an object or a person. So if you want to, go on a morning jog and film yourself on a morning jog with this drone flying around, it'll do that. But it doesn't have like collision avoidance sensors or object detectors that'll keep it away from crashing into something. Something that has that is more of like what Don said, is that prosumer side, where it has a lot more safety features. It has a lot more capabilities in the sensor. And those range anywhere from the high hundreds to a couple $1,000s, especially for the newer ones that come out, like the DJI Air 3 that Don mentioned earlier. So that has that awesome, return to home capability that doesn't need GPS the whole way. It's a really cool feature. But then into the enterprise, that's where you're making an investment. That's easily anywhere in the high single digit thousands, 9,000, probably at the 9,000, 8,000 at the least, to up to $30,000 to $40,000. It's as much as a car investment per aircraft. For example, one of the aircraft I was flying, just to build it, all the materials, everything, the range was $45,000 to $48,000. And the reason there was a range is because there was some component changes over time for the model, but it got up into that range. And even then, it got to points where the pilot still needed to step in to save it. And it was less manual control. The amounts and times it needed to do were reduced, but you still needed to do that. So that's the kind of ranges that you're looking at. Now that, again, that last one is a very big window. All depends on who you get it from.
So if you got the enterprise level drones, like you're saying, nine grand to 50 grand or whatever that is, you would need to be making money with that drone, right?
Yeah.
It's not something you just want to buy on a whim. What about the prosumer side? Do you need to make money with the prosumer drone, or can you just enjoy it because you're an avid drone flyer and you like the technology?
I like that question. So it's a great middle ground. There's a reason why it's in the middle of the two, is because it gives you the capability to test out doing some applications. Of course, it all depends on the type of sensor the drone has. As we know, drones are really cool when they're flying around, but without a sensor to capture the data or do something with, you're pretty much flying around for fun. Nothing wrong with that. But if we're thinking on making money in the future, it's got to have something on board that gets a job or performs a job for somebody. So that prosumer can have those higher grade sensors, like the Mavic 3 Syn. It's like $5,000, $6,000, obviously, around that range, possibly lower as the years go on. But it has like an 8K video camera. It's got 1 terabyte onboard SSD storage. It's great for getting into aerial cinematography and stuff like that. So that's kind of, or even has the ability to do GIS data capture. So something like that gives you a little bit of ability to get dabbling or get started if you're planning on running a business on your own. But obviously, as you get growth, then you want to make the operation smoother for yourself or maybe easier. That's when you start thinking about that enterprise. But that's that transition point from, hey, I'm a startup, to, okay, I got a client list and I need to get through these a lot faster or get more people and more aircraft. So that's what I would say is kind of what that prosumer point is there.
So if you got a guy that's really avid and he's really thrilled about getting into the industry and he's taken his Part 107 certificate, he's got it, and he really just wants to get into the cinematography or the mapping and just experience some stuff, like, what's the best route? Should he start at a basic level with like a Mini 4 or something like that and then move on to prosumer, or should he just go straight into prosumer? Like, what would you say?
I like the advent of using a simulator first and foremost. Always get the practice in there. You don't have to fear crashing so much, because when you crash a live drone, it gets costly with each crash, and you don't want to do that at the prosumer level. For sure. So what I would say is that you want to stick with that $200 to $400 range drone. So like Christian with the DJI Mini SE, you have, besides some practice on the Zephyr simulator like we have with our students, you could get that practice, go out, fly the smaller drone, get really comfortable with it, really familiar with it, even practice doing some aerial cinematography filming with it. But then once you feel really comfortable, like you can do all the basic maneuvers and understand, okay, I can do these maneuvers without having to worry about obstacles. I can stay away from them. I understand my airspace. I have all that knowledge. That's the time when you can go to the prosumer, because you're going to be a much safer pilot to be able to not risk that aircraft and have the possibility of crashing it or having an incident with it where it costs you great value monetarily as well.
Gotcha. Well, okay. So what I'm getting out of all this in pilot versus technology is that obviously there's still going to need to be a pilot to at least program, maintain, and then for emergency situations, be able to help either recover the drone or help it adapt. I want final thoughts. Like, I'm not on the fence, like, oh, you need this, you need that. It's both sides. Definitive. I want you to pick, me, I'm on the side of the robots just because of the future. So just know, AI and robots, I'm on your side. I feel like, I don't need to be there. Do what you gotta do.
Doesn't have to worry about you.
So just in case you're listening, Skynet or whatever it is, I'm on your side. But James, Don, final decision. Good pilot, good technology. What's better?
Good pilot.
Yeah, I don't even think that's a question. You need to be a good pilot, right? Like, if you're not a good pilot, you shouldn't be in the industry.
Because even if you have the best drone in the world, a good pilot's still going to put that best drone into the ground or something else.
Yep.
I appreciate your guys' time. If you have any opinions on pilot versus technology, put them in the comments below. If you're interested in our programs, go to www.sdi.edu for more information. Talk to an admissions rep. Talk to us. Put some questions you have in the comments. But for now, I've been Christian. James, Don, say goodbye.
Goodbye, everyone.
Hi.
Later.
Bye. Okay. But we'll see you in the next one. Have a great day.